Welcome to Aspen Leading Edge. I'm Patty Roberts from St. Mary's University School of Law, and today's guest is Katie Kempner, and she is a researcher with AALS and also my co-author of the recent study about deans, law school deans, and their tenure. Now, Katie, you are not new to researching areas like this. Please tell us a little bit about your position and your responsibilities with AALS so we can start there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Patty. It's a pleasure to be here. I've been with AALS now for almost a decade, actually over a decade. I started my first big research project with AALS was the Before the JD project, which looked at undergraduate pathways to law and graduate school. And since then, I've worked on a couple other major research projects, including another study we did on law school deans in 2022 and a law school faculty study in 2024. So I oversee all of our research right now. I also work on data analytics here. So I work on our program evaluation surveys and other data analytics initiatives. My background is in education, monitoring, and evaluation. So sort of program evaluation. And prior to coming to ALS, I was doing grad school focused around that. And also I've worked in other education related organizations. But yeah, I've been with ALS for a long time and really excited to see the work keep going. So.
Well, you've done such interesting studies, and you mentioned before the JD that I know taught us when it first came out that people who think about law school a lot earlier than we thought. You know, middle school even, they're starting to think about law school. And of course, that means that for those who don't know what lawyers do, you have to get to them early so that they can be competitive versus those who started thinking about it in law school. I think it helped develop or inspire the development of pipeline programs. And you're doing a follow-up now, correct?
Yes, we are doing a follow-up. That's right. So we're currently recruiting undergraduate institutions to participate in that study. The results will probably be published in later 2027. So it's underway now and going to be really exciting. It's been almost a decade since that initial Before the JD study came out. It was released in 2018, so almost right at 10 years, and a lot has changed. So I am very excited to see the results of that. And yeah, just what is different about undergrad perspectives on law school and graduate school since we did that first study. So really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing those results too and how they've changed, if at all. So you have been kept busy with lots of impactful reports at ALS. And the one that immediately preceded the one that we did together, I think really helped form a foundation of some of these leadership studies in legal education that are moving forward. Can you share a little bit about that one?
Yeah, so last fall, we released and I co-authored a report on women attorneys in higher education leadership with Kate Shafson, who is currently at the University of Tennessee. And we obviously were focusing on women's leadership experiences in higher education. We surveyed obviously current and former women law school deans. Many attorneys who are in higher leadership are leading law schools. We also surveyed, and there aren't many of them, but we surveyed higher ed leaders who are lawyers but are leading in other higher education roles, so university provosts and presidents. And I think there's a lot of overlap. We were just talking about how that study really highlighted maybe some of the things that women and all deans really can be doing to prepare for their roles and how they can set themselves up to succeed there kind of before they even step into it. So I think there's a lot of synergy there.
That's terrific. Well, I was so glad that Kelly Testi, Executive Director of ALS, suggested we work together after I shared with her I wanted to research why there is such significant turnover among law school deans every year. You know, we have almost 200 ABA accredited law schools. That means almost 200 deans. And I'm in my 7th year now, and I would look each year and we'd have like a quarter of them turn over. So about 25% of the nation's law schools are transitioning to a new dean in any given year. And I found that alarming when I think about the loss of momentum that an institution has, both at the law school level, but then at the university level, when you have a dean depart, and even in the best of circumstances, you're losing all those alumni relationships. The new dean has to come in, rebuild relationships with the faculty and the staff and the students, as well as the alums. They have to rebuild relationships or build relationships across the university diversity to be effective with community partners. And then, of course, there's the cost of a search. There's a loss of momentum when a dean is in his or her final year, and then in the first year of a new dean who's trying to get their feet under them and figure out a strategic plan, go on a listening tour. So I just felt like that's probably really setting our law schools up to stagnate for a year or to not at least move forward for a year. And I found that problematic. So I wanted to know why. Why is it we're having a quarter of our deans depart each year? And so that prompted this study. And I wanted to confirm, what was it shortening to? What was the dean tenure shortening to? And so again, thankfully, you were suggested to me as an ACE researcher. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how we went about getting survey information and drafting the survey and implementing it and all of that, and what those results showed?
Sure. Yeah. So I think when we first started working together, you already had a really good idea of what you wanted to include in the survey. So we were able to build out from content that you had already drafted. And the survey questionnaire itself focused on a couple of broad areas. So those included the challenges and stressors that deans might be facing in their current roles. We asked a lot of questions about sort of their financial and budget situations, circumstances around why, if they've left their deanship, why they left their deanship, sort of what surrounded that departure. Gosh, we covered a lot of topics. I think it was a very comprehensive survey. So we kind of built out from your draft on the content. And in terms of reaching people, we already knew we wanted to survey all current deans, and we knew their contact information. They're easy to reach. We know how to get to them. I think that the more challenging piece, and I think a really important piece, was making sure that we could reach former deans. One thing we knew we needed to do to understand why deanship tenures might be changing is to understand what were the challenges in the past. Have they changed over time? And so in order to do that, we knew we had to reach former deans. So I had some experience with our 2022 Dean study in just collecting information from former deans who maybe have retired or just otherwise are not working in the legal academy anymore. So we had some historical contact information there. A lot of it needed to be updated, but we ended up researching. We went back to, I think, deans who were serving starting in 2000.
I
Which
know.
was
I was so proud of us that we went back that far, but it wasn't easy, was it?
Yeah, it took some time, but we were able to use, old ALS directories that had been published during that time to find former deans. And then obviously we were researching your research assistants and mine, their contact information. And we actually ended up fielding the survey to over 600 current and former law school deans. And I think I was thrilled with that number. And we heard back from, I think, about 260 current and former deans. Some of them held more than one deanship. So we got information about almost 300 deanships in our survey. And obviously, you also conducted so many interviews if you want to add how those played in.
Yes. So it seemed to me, while you were doing such a great job crunching our numbers and our survey respondents' answers, that it would be really helpful to get some of the narrative, some of the things that our survey couldn't get to. And so we had asked if anyone wanted to be interviewed or was willing to be interviewed when they completed the survey to let us know. And I had also put out a call on the ALS Dean's listserv. And over 100 people volunteered. And so between November and February of this year, I conducted 70 interviews with current and former deans. And they were so generous with their time and really candid, giving a lot of insight that really enriched our study because it filled out some of the other circumstances in addition to, ranking challenges and stressors. Sometimes it explained how those challenges and stressors might have been different at their own institution, but it also gave us an opportunity to get some really good news. And I'll talk about that a little later, but it was really wonderful to hear from deans who thought this was a terrific job, even though they'd had these challenges and stressors, many saying it was the best job in the world. And so that was good to hear. Also, by the time we had the survey results and I was doing these interviews, I wanted to know a little bit more, like, tell me more about your path to the deanship, why you sought a deanship in the first place, and then also what qualities and skills and experiences did those deans think new deans should have or be considering when they go into the deanship. So it was just really a treasure trove of information that we have woven through the report. And I should mention the name of the report. So we titled it Relentless, The Pressure Shortening Law School Deanships and What Must Change. And we came to that title because when we studied the law school deanships, the word relentless came up over and over again, especially in the interviews. And so it seemed to us that that was a signal from the deans we were talking with, and also should be a signal to those who are interested in this topic about how deans described this job. So you want to talk a little bit about what the survey results showed us, Katie?
Yeah, and maybe we can start with describing changes in how long deans have been in their roles. So this was sort of, as you said, an underlying kind of key question. And I think we all know that anecdotally we have been hearing that deanships have been getting shorter. But I think we wanted to put some data behind that. And also, this gave us an opportunity to look kind of even further back, obviously, than the deans who are currently on the job. So in our full report, we have two sort of ways of looking at this. One of those is just sharing out the survey results and categorizing the deanships that were held by the people who responded to our survey by how long they lasted and kind of calculating those averages. And what our survey found, and again, just noting that the survey does not include every deanship that's ever happened. It only includes those that were held by the people who responded to us. And thank you to those of you who did that. But we really see a trend where in the 90s and kind of going into the early 2000s, we're seeing like a 10-year average tenure. And then in the early 2000s, we do see that start to tick down to around 7 years. And then for deanships that began between 2016 and 2020, and these are completed deanships, the average in our survey respondents was about 4.5 years. So I think that that trend is really clear and puts a little bit of just math behind kind of the anecdotal reports that we've been hearing. We also got some information about deanships that have happened very recently. So those that have started after 2021 and have already ended. Now that's a really small number of deanships. A lot of those are still ongoing, meaning we don't know when they'll end and we don't know how long they will be. So that analysis was helpful, but I think to complement that, I was very curious in kind of looking even further back. And obviously we knew we would be limited, even though we went back to 2000, we were limited in obviously just who we could reliably reach with a survey. So I looked at Rosenblatt's Dean's database, with which our listeners I'm sure are familiar with. It's the largest publicly available resource about law school deanships. And Dean Rosenblatt has cataloged deanships going back, I think, to the 1800s. I took a look back to deanships that started beginning in 1920 through now, and we found a pretty similar pattern. So even in the 1920s through like the 1960s and 70s, 80s, we're looking at 10-year averages and then kind of going down, hovering around 7 years for quite a while. And then again, in the early 2000s, we start to see some more clear decline. Now, since we published this and as we've been working on this, we have gotten questions just around how to account for the fact that deanships that are happening now, if they started, let's say, for example, between 2021 and now and have already ended, they are by definition very short or relatively short. And we know that's a limitation of this type of work. One thing we've been discussing is just the fact that we need to, and others are already doing this work, continue to keep track of incoming and outgoing deans, understanding how long they've been in those roles, and potentially doing some outreach at the time of those transitions to understand the circumstances a little bit more if that's possible. So I think the conclusion we really came to is that there seems to definitely be a trend of deanships getting shorter, and it remains to be seen if that trend will continue, and that's going to take years more of data collection, but it's definitely there when we look to the past.
Absolutely. And when you consider, if you're generalizing, deanships used to last around 10 years. And now, even if you don't count the years where there would still be ongoing current deanships, it's down to 4.5, 2016 to 2020. So it's definitely decreasing over time. And in the interviews, I found a number of reasons for that, some that supported survey data and some that didn't. So I heard from deans who said the job has dramatically changed. It's evolved in its responsibilities. It used to be, some would say, very alumni and outward focused. It's now much more inner management focused, managing up, managing down, and also the alumni and community engagement. Heard a lot from deans about inability to have an appropriate work-life balance because of the demands of the institution and the events and the expectations from stakeholders that they show up. But the biggest thing that we saw from deans in the survey and was consistent throughout the interviews was that 65% of deans cited financial pressure as a major or extreme challenge. That was more than any other stressor. Certainly, we can understand that university budgets are shrinking. There are less undergraduate students at some universities. That's causing budget problems. But I think that what the insight that we gained from the report and from the interviews is that it's not just about the budget. It's about the fact that deans are expected to reach certain milestones, to have certain metrics, both for student outcomes and also incoming student credentials and revenue targets and all of that, but that they didn't have control over the funds that would be necessary to enable them to reach those targets. There was a lot of talk about micromanagement from the university or limited funds that didn't make them able to reach those targets. And so that was an interesting facet to explore. The next stressor that came up was one that had nearly 2/3 of the deans saying, these are deans who'd served fewer than 4 years, a strained relationship with university administration was a major challenge. So in this one, I think the budget is an overarching stressor also. If university leadership is determining what a law school's budget should be, and the law dean doesn't think that they have the resources necessary to do what they were hired to do, or what their goals are and the faculty's goals are, then of course there will be strain with university administration. But we also heard about a lot of turnover in president and provost positions. So when you have 1 in 4 universities changing presidents, that was in 23 and 24, and provosts changing almost as often, it makes it really hard for the law school to establish a strong relationship with that university leadership. And the middle management nature of the role makes it very difficult for those deans, even who are continuing in their role, to every 4 years be reintroducing the law school and the law school's priorities and the dean's vision to a new president who is himself or herself learning the institution and the role. We had some interesting results related to women deans and deanships held by Black or African American deans. And what survey results gave us some real concern?
Yeah, that's a great question, Patty. So we looked at challenges. That's obviously something that we know will impact how long a dean stays in their role. We wanted to look at, and I think we need to continue examining are there certain characteristics about deans that may influence or vary with how long they stay in their roles. And so I'll preface this by saying that in terms of race and ethnicity, we're working with pretty small ends here in our study. So we're limited to the people who responded to our survey. And so I don't think we can say this is representative of, all deanships held by minoritized groups. But we did find that almost half of the deanships that we heard about in our survey that were held by Black or African American deans lasted fewer than 4 years. Now, we again have a small n, but I think that stood out to us. I think we wanted to highlight that as a finding from this study. And we also found that women deans on average serve 2 years fewer than men. So I think those were two things that we wanted to highlight. We don't want to put those to the side just because we're working with small numbers. That's an important takeaway from this work. And this very similar themes came out of the Women Attorneys in Higher Ed leadership report that I mentioned at the top. So I think you and I have talked about the need to really invest more here, not only in the research, but also in the work of understanding the unique challenges that are existing in this space and supporting these deans as they go into their roles and throughout their time in the deanship.
I heard additional stress around work-life balance from our female deans, so I interviewed, and some deans of color. So the difference was supported in the narratives, the difference in dean tenure. But one of the things that we talked about in the interviews was how little training deans receive, law school deans. They don't receive formal leadership training for the most part, fewer than 20% reported receiving any formal leadership training, and only 5.5% had executive coaching. The majority of deans had started as an associate dean and said that while that was useful training to be a dean, it was hardly complete. They weren't privy to budget and finance and HR, the governance and relational demands of the deanship. So there was a real emphasis that we concluded with that more leadership training is needed, more official onboarding, more formal onboarding when a new law school dean comes on. And as far as executive coaching goes, and I know you and I have talked about this before, I didn't realize that executive coaching was something that I could have access to. I thought that was something I'd have to do on my own. But when I considered getting an executive coach after talking to other deans who had them, I called HR. And I said, is this something you cover? And they said, yeah, it's professional development. And so I was able to avail myself of that through the university, which I found very helpful. And I think a lot of deans probably don't know. I know that because of our results and this turnover of deans and the lack of formal leadership, that ALS has said that they are going to start to do some additional legal education consulting, also work on dean searches and dean coaching. So really excited that ALS is going to step into some of this void for law school leadership. Even when we had people who were leaving voluntarily, and the majority of our deans left their deanship voluntarily, the majority of those leaving voluntarily went to the faculty, although there were some who became presidents or provosts or went to other law schools to be dean, as you indicated. Even those who left voluntarily left earlier than they had planned. A quarter of them had left earlier than planned. And again, that was related to some issues perhaps with university administration, but also some of them left because of burnout, health consequences, and family demands. So that was also interesting because the survey might indicate, oh, look, the majority are leaving voluntarily, but the interviews told a different story, that there were reasons for early departures, even when leaving voluntarily. So I said that I wanted to mention what deans wanted us to know. And in the narratives, it was evident how much law school deans enjoy the position overall, despite these challenges. So when asking, why did they decide to be a dean? There were no deans who were like, I grew up always wanting to be a law school dean. And it was very rare that anybody on the faculty even was thinking about becoming a dean. But someone might have said, hey, would you consider this? Or I think you'd be really great. Or mentored them, or their experiences in administration made them catch the bug and think they might like to do it. They might want to change the trajectory of their law school. There were a lot of different reasons, but it certainly wasn't preordained that people would become law school deans. So we do have to, as an academy, do a better job of identifying those who might be good leaders and then supporting them in that journey. But the deans who did do the job, even those who left early or had the challenges and stressors that we talked about, said it was the best job in the world, that what they love about it most is the students, and new students come every year with a new first-year class, and their faculty, staff, and alumni were uniformly very supportive of the dean. Those three stakeholders were consistently supportive and enriched the role of the dean in the interviews that we did. So we've talked about a lot, and before we wrap up, are there any additional findings that you'd like to mention before we just encourage people to read the study, Relentless, the Pressure Shortening Law School Deanships and What Must Change?
Yeah, I think I would really just echo that, Patty, that this report, we've skimmed the surface today in terms of what we cover in the full report. So I would strongly encourage those who are interested to read the full report. And I'll also say this, we conducted a very comprehensive survey as part of this study. And, one of the outcomes of that is I think we have even more data that we really couldn't fully cover even in this first initial report. So we have more that I think we need to continue exploring and reporting. And I'm really looking forward to doing that and seeing how, further exploration of these initial findings can contribute to implementing some of the recommendations that we have at the end of this report.
I completely agree. I think this is just the start, but it is a really great start. I did want to also just touch on what the interview said about what qualities a dean needs. So if we have anybody listening in the academy who's like, I wonder if I should be a dean, the first quality that the most deans said a dean should have is emotional intelligence. That is critical to the role. So is hard work and good judgment. And so those three things are critical for the position. But also deans talked about how the fit is so important, the fit between the dean and the institution. So those who are considering being a dean, we would recommend not just seeking any deanship, but finding a deanship where you would feel comfortable as a faculty member eventually, where your mission and your vision and your values are aligned. And that seemed to really help to extend the tenure of a law school deanship. So we hope that aspiring deans will read the report and will understand some additional things that they can do to prepare themselves for not only a deanship, but the right deanship. We also have recommendations for institutions. We want them to be careful in their pre-search planning, that they're transparent about finances and other things, what authority the incoming dean will have. And then it shouldn't just be about hiring the right person. That person should get formal and structured onboarding, mentorship, and even mid-tenure support. So if you want to keep a dean longer than the 5 years that seems to elude us these days, maybe there should be a mid-tenure sabbatical, a summer sabbatical, for instance. Deans indicated that could really make a difference. And then for the legal education community, we've really got to work with a pipeline of good leaders, future leaders, and be intentional about mentoring and developing those leaders so that every year, if we continue to turn over a quarter of the deans in America, that we have 50 great people stepping into those roles, especially when there is just so much tumult in legal education and higher education right now. So we hope that people will see the report and understand a little bit more about the position and what we as an academy can do to improve the situation for law school deans currently and future law school deans. So now I want to ask you, Katie, what are your predictions for the future of legal education in the coming decade? You've done a lot of research into higher education and legal education, and how do you think it might change in the coming decade?
That's such a big question, and I think there are so many things that we could talk about and say that are going to influence what is going to change in legal education over the next decade. And that seems like a long time where a lot of changes could happen. But one thing that I've been thinking about in relation to this study, and it kind of comes from conversations I've had as we have released this report, is that we have a lot of deans who are currently serving who are approaching, the 5-year mark, the 4-year mark, and they're still in their deanships. And we do not know how long they're going to stay there. And I think our hope is maybe that this report can help to support deans in staying kind of beyond that 5-year mark, as you were just saying. But I think one of the things that we might see, and I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a prediction, but I think we may still be seeing maybe sort of the tail end of the influence of the pandemic on law school deans. And I don't think our report gets into detail about how that specific event may have impacted how long deans who started or were mid-tenure or who left their jobs during the pandemic and in the years that followed. So I think, one of our tasks at AALS is to continue to track these data trends and to really lock into some of those legal education recommendations that you just stated. And I'm looking forward to being here with the AALS team as we hopefully do that.
Well, I think you bring up a terrific point that I hadn't mentioned, and that is the impact of COVID. That weighed very heavily on deans that served at that time. There was an emotional weight of managing something that was literally about life and death of stakeholders of law schools at that time and the decision making that was involved. COVID and its impact came up more in the narratives than I expected that it would. So I think you're right that that could use some additional exploration. Well, I am eternally grateful to you, Katie Kempner, Director of Research and Data Analytics for AALS, and to Kelly Testy for thinking that this was a report and a study worth doing under the AALS banner. Also, so grateful to every dean who was so candid in the survey responses and in the narratives. And since then, with the responses that we're getting from deans who have read the story or the report, it's really exciting to see that we've touched a nerve, that we've uncovered something that I think it really needs further exploration and attention. And it's an exciting first step for law school deans and increasing their tenure rather than decreasing it in the future. If you've enjoyed this conversation and you'd like to hear from additional thought leaders in the Academy, please listen to Aspen Leading Edge podcast on your favorite podcast channel. If you want to read the report, Relentless, The Pressures Shortening Law School Deanships and What Must Change, you can find it on the AALS website. Thank you.